And so here's a quote from Orville Wendell Holmes Sr., which says, "The axis of the earth sticks out visibly through the center of each and every town or city. What is happening in the world shows in the cities." And I think that is all that true when it comes to something like the year 2020. It's a very strong reminder of just how impactful our communities are, how impacted they are, and just really the importance of no matter what you do for a living or no matter where you live, you are a part of some type of city or some type of community. And I think it begs the question, where are cities going? And that's going to be $1 million question. I think if people knew this clearly, they'd be making a lot of money. And I think the reality is no one, I think, anticipated the year 2020, let alone has a real good grasp of 2021 and beyond. But I think it becomes this fundamental conversation of where we're going. And being somebody who works for the city of Los Angeles, who runs the IT department, who's been with the city for some time, who's born and raised in Los Angeles, I am a self-proclaimed homer. I'm very proud the Lakers are in the finals and a bunch of other things. If you root for someone else, that's fine. But I'm born in LA, I represent LA. But being someone who works for the city of LA, certainly I have a perspective of where I think cities are going and where the future of cities are, whether they're big or small. And I think it asks this fundamental question of how you, the audience, see the city of the future. And when I have conversations with various people, I've been doing this job for 5 years, I've worked for the city longer than that, I think people give very different perspectives of where they see the future and where they see future cities. Some people I talk to see this as the future of a city. One big, large, massive traffic jam, something in which there's a lot of angst, there's a lot of trepidation, something where they just really feel like a city is pollution, a city is transportation issues, a city is just a tough, nasty place to try to live. I actually have an uncle who used to live in Ohio, and I remember it being something very impactful growing up. Because, you know, I grew up in LA, I grew up in a big city. People who grew up in a big city, it's something you're very accustomed to. But I remember how much he did not like visiting Los Angeles. And I remember becoming at a young age aware of a big city, small city kind of friction, and how much he despised flying into LAX and simply trying to rent a car and drive around. In his world, he saw large cities very much in this way. Some other folks see this as the city of the future, something very, optimistic, something where our rocket plane takes us around and everything is beautiful and everything is green, everything is nice. And I think optimists will tend to see the city of the future of this is what we're working towards and this is where we can go. Some people see it in a very nihilistic way, almost post-apocalyptic, a world in which, buildings are falling apart and it's rubble. It's something that shows up in just those horrible sci-fi movies, and they see it as the city of future. And some people see it in the way they maybe grew up watching the Jetsons. And so the city of the future is your dog on a treadmill flying around town and calling it a dog walk. And so a lot of folks, I think, see the city of the future in many different ways. And honestly, there's probably kind of a component or a kernel of truth in all of these perceptions. But I think it also is a reminder to us that as either technologists or as elected leaders or simply just as residents and citizens of our city, how we are the ones who are ultimately going to dictate how our cities are built and what our cities will be like. And so I think that is kind of the fundamental theme of what I'll be discussing. When we think of the city of the future, now I'll start to drill in on not just maybe what you might think, but the way I see a city of the future. And, many of us have heard the expression, a smart city. But I really do believe the city of the future is a quote unquote smart one. Now, of course, that's a very loaded statement to say that you're living or you're operating in a smart city. No one wants to live in a dumb city, right? And so what does it really mean to be a quote unquote smart city? Well, the first point, and we really at the city of Los Angeles see it in 5 major components. And honestly, no one component is more important than the rest. The first one, I think, is what people often think of, and they think of smart city infrastructure. And when you think of smart city infrastructure, you're thinking of physical technology that's used to deliver smart city technologies. Often it focuses on technology in the rights of way. So you think of Internet of Things, IoT sensors, things that monitor noise, monitor pollution, et cetera. You think of 5G, you think of 5G communications, ultra high speed mobile communications, think of fiber optics. You think of the infrastructure and the technical hardware it takes to build or create a smart city. But really, that's just really one component, at times even a small component of what it means to be a smart city. I think the second one has to do with data and data usage, and that's an extremely important one. So smart city data, the tools and the practices a city has, is really of the future of a city and what makes them smart. And really what this is, it's cross department. So, whether you're a police department or whether you're the parks department, there's the sharing, the effective sharing of data between all the different departments in a city. A large city like Los Angeles, for example, has 44 departments, if you can imagine. One of them is the airport, LAX. Another one is the police department. Another one's the harbor. Another one is cultural affairs. So from big to small, there's a lot of departments in a city. But it's also the sharing of data between government to resident. There's a lot of really important data that government captures, and the sharing of it to the residents through things like open data portals is a very powerful way to not just improve transparency between what government is doing and its people, but also ways to empower residents to use that data for new and very creative and very powerful things. There's also government to business. And then of course, machine to machine information sharing, which is honestly could be one of the most impactful. The idea that a sensor in one part of the city can influence traffic automatically in another part of the city, that is a very powerful concept that of course can also be a very nerve-wracking one if you think about it. But a city that has the ability to analyze, think, and respond is an extremely important part of being a smart city or a city of the future. Another one has to do with digital services and applications. These are the apps, the websites, the other services that we use to digitally deliver city services to the public. And then of course, there's smart city connectivity and the idea of digital inclusion. Honestly, a smart or a city of the future is one that integrates all the different kinds of solutions and integrates the different communities that people are competing in our digital economy and that people have access. They could be people with disabilities. They could be people who live in underserved communities. It's extremely important that the city of the future incorporates and promotes an equity and at least an equality of opportunity across our different communities. And then of course, smart city governance. A city of the future is one that organizes itself and organizes well. So I'm going to take a second. I'm going to go through some of these topics and give you maybe a little bit of insight as to what a city of the future looks like, and just kind of tackle some of these and give you some concrete examples. So when we think about from an infrastructure perspective, the city of the future, I believe, connects, and that's an important word. At the city of Los Angeles, and I'll use a lot of city of LA examples, we have a system called ATSAC, the Automated Traffic Surveillance and Control System. And what ATSAC does is it takes cameras across 4,500 connected, or I say 2,500 cameras that influence 4,500 connected intersections. We have loop detectors, those little wires in the ground, so that if a car pulls up or a motorcycle pulls up, we know there's a car there, and it'll allow the lights to then adjust and allow that person to go by. But if a car does not pull up, we'll continue to allow traffic going the other direction. These are all these automatic ways in which a city senses and connects what's happening with traffic. And it has at least a 10% reduction in travel time. That is a very conservative estimate. You thought traffic was bad in Los Angeles. It's these types of multi-million-dollar systems, which honestly we've been doing since the 1984 Olympics. They have made tremendous improvements for us to be able to sense what's happening with transportation and make adjustments proactively. Another item has to do with our street lights. We've reduced electricity usage, and we have a savings of over $3 million a year by converting 165,000 street lamps to LED. And we have over 50,000 of them connected online. So as you can imagine, it was a $9 million project that repaid itself in 3 years. And since then, we've just been saving over 60% energy every year. And on top of that, if you were to take a satellite photo of the city of Los Angeles, our old lights created this halo effect in the atmosphere, and LED lights are much cleaner, and they actually allow much more true. So you actually can see the stars even better today than you could years ago, simply by converting all of these street lamps into LED. And then I think the idea of being a 5G city. LA was one of the first 5G cities. We have connectivity today through over 2,500 5G cellular access points. Honestly, it's really at the point where most people's phones or tablets or devices aren't even 5G enabled. So the infrastructure is deployed while many people don't yet have the capability to use it, but that of course is coming as it enters the market. And we have another 3,000 access points planned over the next 3 years, but we're talking up to gigabit speed off of a smartphone. And I think a good example is like LAX. You know, often when people think of the negative side, when they think of the positive side of Los Angeles, they think of weather, they think of Hollywood, they think of Venice Beach, right? When they think of the negative side, they'll think of things like traffic, or they'll think of LAX, right? A very busy airport. For those of us who have flown in and out of LAX, you say, oh my gosh, it's so busy. Well, there's a great reason why. It's effectively the same airport it was in the 1984 Olympics. We've been making tremendous improvements over the last several years, but it's effectively the same airport, but of course it has almost, triple the number of people. In fact, in the last 20 years, we've had passenger volume go up over 35%. And so of course our modernization projects are critical, but one of them is this one called LAMP, which is landside modernization project. And what you're going to have, it's actually one of the largest public works programs in US history. And that comes down to this idea of fiber optics, Wi-Fi, connected lighting, an Internet of Things sensors all around the airport, an automated people mover, et cetera. And so this item will be coming in into the next several years and will of course dramatically change the way LAX operates. But really what these are is just examples of how infrastructure makes a city smarter and creates a city of the future, one that can handle much more demand, as we could see with the airport. And of course, data tools and practices. So when we think of a city of the future, we think of one that thinks, we think of one that acts. And a couple of examples of it. Clean streets. We're often waiting, and in a large city, you often wait for someone to complain about something. So we have 6,500 miles of streets, and if somebody dumps a couch on a street, it's impossible to know that person did it unless someone tells us. And so what we did was we converted at LA from a reactive model to a proactive one in which we every year assess the streets and street cleanliness ourselves. And so by creating a proactive method where we can categorize streets through what we call a clean stat process, then we could be proactive, so we don't have to wait for somebody to notify us that something's happening on a specific street. We can actually identify it ourselves and resolve it. And so through this program, we've reduced in just the last couple of years the number of not clean streets by 82%. So it's a good example of the use of data and data analysis to then allow resource allocation to go ahead and get the resources where they need to be. I'm reminded of kind of an analogy that was given when it comes to smart policing and predictive policing. And this came from former Chief Bill Bratton. And he says, it's really very simple. You take crime and you make dots, and then you put the cops on the dots. And it's the same, I think, if you were to simplify this across anything. And here's an example in which you find uncleanliness, you find dirt, and you put the cleanup crews on the dirt. It's as simple as that. But it requires data analysis, and it requires smart systems that can allocate resources through modern systems and modern processes. I think another one's a very human one. When we think about sports, in youth sports, quite often people like young females are underrepresented. And so we at the City of Los Angeles will try to identify and say, what's a way for us to improve female participation in tennis, in soccer, and all the kinds of sports that they want to participate in, and to kind of help address, a social stigma in which maybe young girls aren't interested in sports, and maybe it's just a boys thing. And so through the use of data analysis, through demographics, park data, public health data, we did targeted marketing, and we even did no-cost offers for young females to participate in our sports. And what we're describing is hundreds of thousands of youth every year in LA, park sports. And we did an increase, a dramatic one, from previously a 26% participation to within a couple of short years, a 45% participation. And so we can dramatically improve young girls' participation in something as simple as sports, which psychologists will say helps build things like confidence and self-esteem and interpersonal communications, et cetera. It's more than just about sports, folks. And then we have something called the LA Data Science Federation, where we are a city of limited resources. We may be LA and we're big, and you think of us as just having money everywhere. As a city manager, I can clearly tell you we do not. But when we think about trying to align resources, we take urban challenges that are all around us, And we have combined university data scientists, so young data scientist students, undergraduates, graduates, and we said, we're going to take our civic challenges and we're going to bring them over to you. Can you spend a semester helping us understand how to fix these? And this started back in 2015, and today we have over 18 universities involved. We've completed over 40 projects. And it's everything from, simple aspects on how to better audit maybe people when it comes to business taxes so that you're not harassing people who are a low likelihood of having a change, to something much more impactful like our Vision Zero for reducing fatalities of cars and cyclists who are dying on the roads, right? So the participation of gathering universities and some of their great skill sets and then combining it with our urban challenges is, I think, another great example of how a city of the future operates. It takes advantage of its public, it takes advantage of its nonprofits to try to help make a better city. Digital services, digital services are quite often, I think, what people think about when it comes to a smart city. And at the city of LA, and I know many other cities can do this very well, we have over 1,500 city services and we make them accessible through our MyLA301 mobile app. We're processing over 1.3 million requests annually through a smartphone app. Because in a city of over 4 million people, it's not going to be human to human interactions that are going to be the most common. It's really going to be technological ones. So if someone has a need, or if they see a pothole, or if they simply are requesting information or they want to pay a bill, the ability to do this through an app is extremely important. We're also in the process of building this into Amazon Alexa and Google Home, so you don't even have to download an app. You can simply, from the comfort of your living room, do these very same functions. We also have personalized hyper-local information about neighborhoods. So we have a Webby Award-winning website called lacity.org, and we create something called the Resident Portal. Because when you live in a really big city like Los Angeles, you don't want it to feel like a really big city. You want it to feel like a really small city. You want it to feel like your neighborhood. And so we've worked aggressively to try to bring information so that if you tell me your address, I'll tell you all sorts of information right around your neighborhood. The libraries you have, the events that are occurring, who's your council member. Because, people who live in Los Angeles, yes, if they're traveling, they'll say they live in LA. But if you ask them where they live, they'll say, oh, I live in West LA, or I live near the beach, or I live downtown, or I live in Silver Lake, right? That's usually what the answer is, and that's the way people identify themselves. And of course, something as important as COVID. What do digital services, what does a city of the future mean when you have something as impactful as a pandemic? What the city of Los Angeles, we feel, is the ability to deploy rapid services. So when COVID became, part of our vocabulary, at the city of Los Angeles, I remember getting the call. I got a call, it was on a Friday evening, in which I was told from a deputy mayor, we need to build an app and we need to start testing Angelenos for COVID. And we need it it was a Friday evening call, and I said, we need it for Sunday. Great. Could you have called me on a Tuesday and allowed me to roll it out on a Friday? Nope, it's got to be a Friday night, and you got to roll it out on a Sunday. And so really, we very quickly brought together about 5 of my staff and a vendor, and we were able to put together an app that triages. It walks you through all the questions. It allows you to set up for an appointment to do a mobile COVID test. It gives you, depending on where you are, it tells you the closest locations. It tracks the number of open tests available so that you're not committing someone to a test when there's none available. It gave them a time. It sent them the information. It gave them a text. And when they showed up, we had the app ready to go for the testing facilities. At our height, we were doing about 12,000 daily tests. And that was a couple of months ago across 20 sites. And so it's just an example, I think, of when it comes to a city of the future, it's one that can pivot and one that can respond very quickly to something as terrible as like a pandemic. Connectivity and digital inclusion is an important conversation. And I would say the city of the future, it ennobles its population. And ennoble is a word I like to use from time to time. It's not the most modern word, but it's a word that I think is certainly relevant and important. But it really ennoblizes the people who live there. It empowers them. And when we think about this, LA is not one group, one type of person. It's a very diverse community that has very diverse needs. But when we think of us living in a digital age, and we think of us even now, we have all these students who have to get their work done remotely, then it becomes extremely important that our digital skills and our digital access have become essential just simply how we live in the year 2020. And so a city of the future is one that takes us to account and responds to it. At the city of Los Angeles, we built something called the Find Your Future app, which thousands of LA City youth have used to do a job skills quiz to see what their either interests or what their strengths are, and then connect them with local jobs. We have Youth Technology Skills Center for after school at a place called the Clubhouse at the Expo Center. The Expo Center is in Exposition Park. It's right near the USC and the Coliseum. It's right near many famous museums, including what's being built right now, the Lucas Museum. And LA's Department of Disability, which takes a lot of effort to expand the education, it guides and it trains all city departments on how to include digital accessibility to ensure that everything we do is inclusive and accessible regardless of who you are. One good example, I think, is what we call our Cycle program, a very simple model that's not always easy to execute. The city of LA had to get rid of thousands of computers to modernize due to Windows XP. But these were good computers, good functional computers. So what we did was we committed them to a nonprofit who did refurbishment. They used people who were former convicts, people who it was their first job, etc. And they gave them skills on how to refurbish a computer. And then we went ahead and gave them away to people in need. And so we distributed 5,000 devices. And when I say distributed them, these are like 20 devices at a time. So it'd be a distribution and they'd all have a different meaning. It could be a student who it's the first time there's a computer in the house. It could be somebody who is below poverty line. It could be a woman who is escaping an abusive relationship. I'll never forget having a computer distribution. I loved attending the computer distributions because they would always kind of set you right and all the frustrations of the day in which you're wrestling with office politics and managing staff and trying to deal with a lack of budget. But when you're handing someone a computer and you're taking it to their car, and a lady explains to you that she's been in an abusive marriage for 20 years and she just left it, and this would be the first time she's trying to apply for a job, and that this computer will be how she will apply for a job to escape that relationship, that's meaningful. And that's an example of one of 5,000 devices that were deployed as a part of our Cycle LA program. The next one is really just about governance, and that's just the last component that I'll be discussing. I think a city of the future, it organizes. It's one that takes its resources, its assets, and it manages them effectively. And it has the right kinds of public-private partnerships. The example listed here is what we call the I3 consortium. It's the Internet of Things integrator. Everyone talks about IoT, and yet IoT is spread across many vendors and many different kinds of devices. And really what the I3 integrator is, it's an open source platform built between USC, the city of Los Angeles, and 80+ partners that takes disparate data across all sorts of IoT devices, and it makes it meaningful. It makes it understood. It streams it to the right types of customers and allows us to be able to use it and use it effectively. And so it's just another example of a platform on how a city of the future can organize its various assets. In this case, a great university like USC. We do projects with UCLA folks, if there's anyone here who likes the competition of it. But this one happens to be USC, and it's just an opportunity in which you organize the different resources and assets you have available to make for a better city. But I think most importantly, the city of the future is heart-centered. I've described so many different kinds of technologies. I've described so many different kinds of partnerships. And honestly, it's not just an LA thing. There's great things done all across this country. There's great things done all across the world. But I think what makes something great at its very heart is it's being heart-centered. Remember, these are human-centered projects. Everything I just described, if it doesn't deliver real value to people and real value to communities, then it's really a waste of money and it's a waste of effort. So technology in and of itself is meaningless. It's really the delivery that it does for the people who represent our communities. And why is that so important? Well, we live in an era where as Americans have become increasingly digital, they've also become increasingly distrustful of digital technology. So remember what I mentioned earlier on. In 2010, it's like, oh my gosh, this is so exciting, tablets. 2012, what's this in the cloud? There was so much excitement around what technology can mean. There'll be driverless cars, there'll be all these great things. But when you think about the last 3 or 4 years, you think about data breaches. You think about data that you entrusted to a website that then uses it in some other way. You think about people who have a sincere and honest fear and concern regarding what technology will do, and that technology will actually ruin their lives as opposed to improve their lives. The word techlash, right, a technology backlash, is now a part of the English dictionary. It's a representation of us as a society and this concern of really what technology will mean. Honestly, it's something I take very personally. It's a fear of what people like me are implementing. Try that on for size. And for all of you who are technologists, you probably feel some of the same burden that the things that you build are having an impact on society, and what will that impact be? And I think a very important thing as a technologist who works in government is that public trust, it takes time to build and it's easy to lose. So we can do 100 really good things, and it just takes one really bonehead moment from just one of my staff or some other staff that can cause a substantial issue that really impacts people's lives in a very negative way. And so it means that we really need to be on our game. And that innovative technology is no longer good enough. It's just not good enough to be innovative. Innovative is great, but innovation is really just part of the conversation. It needs to be ethical. It needs to be heart-centered. It needs to be technology that really improves us and ennobles us as a society, instead of one that just gets, percentages of efficiency. And I think what's important here is that's why you and I are part of building what we would call the city of the future. So with that being said, I appreciate you taking the time and just kind of hearing what we have to say regarding it. So thank you very much.